Don't worry, the dog doesn't die. Keeping up with the vibes and theme of the spooky season, I decided to take a gander at a horror film that took the internet by storm last month, the canine-centered paranormal anxiety attack known as Good Boy. Good Boy is a horror film presented from the perspective of man's best friend during an encounter with the supernatural forces intent on causing harm to this indeed very good boy's best friend and owner. The trailers for this movie were everywhere on Beyonce's internet in September, as people had basically two initial thoughts to this film. One, this is a really inventive and interesting concept, and two, for the love of God, nothing better happened to this sweet baby angel. Well, I'm happy to inform you that nothing all that awful happens to the fur baby in question, besides being saddled with a stereotypically stupid horror movie protagonist as an owner. With that major concern put to rest, this film did gain an insane amount of momentum in a very short period of time, garnering enough attention even for a theatrical release, which can be both a blessing and a curse for what is very much a low-budget indie horror flick. So, was Good Boy able to live up to this newfound hype train that got rolling in its favor, or did it end up getting sent to the doghouse? Writing-wise, for the majority of its shockingly short 85-minute runtime, Good Boy is a very traditional and standard supernatural horror flick. Besides its insanely inventive concept, there's not a lot of outside-of-the-box writing being done in this movie, and it follows a very similar formula to the more established pillars of the genre. The film obviously revolves around its four-legged superstar, Indy, a Nova Scotia duck-tolling retriever whose owner Todd, suffering from some sort of respiratory disease, decides to pack up and randomly move out to his grandfather's abandoned, secluded, and allegedly haunted house in the woods. Once there, Indy and Todd are subjected to the classic, slowly escalating haunting that anyone familiar with the supernatural horror genre is accustomed to. The hook of this movie is that the audience experiences this terrifying ordeal through the eyes and ears of Indy. It is admittedly refreshing to be along for the ride with a character who is acutely aware that something is actually wrong, as opposed to normally oblivious human characters. Indy is wary of his new surroundings pretty much immediately, and because of that, spends the entire film trying to warn Todd or protect him from whatever unseen forces are threatening him. This is an incredibly creative take on a very classic horror movie trope that we all know pretty well. How many movies have you seen where the family dog is the first one to sense danger before being unceremoniously taken out by the film's antagonistic force? Well, this movie flips that concept on its head, as Indy not only survives the film's events, but is 100% its main character. Indy is who we spend pretty much the entire movie with, which makes for a really unique cinematic experience. Unfortunately, as creative as the premise is, the rest of the movie outside of it is pretty paint by numbers, with the viewer spending large portions of the runtime searching in the background of dimly lit rooms for signs of some sort of paranormal activity. Don't get me wrong, this is great for setting a tone of tension and unease throughout the film, but after about 30-40 minutes starts to drag just a little bit. The film does a good job of establishing some oddly interesting lore surrounding how long this entity has been haunting Todd's entire family, establishing that this is not a random occurrence, but in fact something more insidious. However, outside of these factors, it's pretty clear that the plot of this movie was constructed around its base concept and not much else, which can make for, at times, a pretty dull viewing experience. Simply put, there's really not a whole lot going on in Good Boy outside of the awesome privilege of getting to tag along with one of the cutest horror movie protagonists of all time. Speaking of this film's insanely adorable main character, Indy provides one of the highest quality animal acting performances I have ever seen. Now, I know that isn't exactly a long list, and to be fair, I haven't properly ranked my top animal acting performances really ever, but I gotta think Indy would land near the top of it. As I said, this movie doesn't have a whole lot else going on outside of its novel concept, but unless you're a broken film freak like me, you probably won't even notice, because Indy does such a good job engaging the viewer that it's not hard to get invested. I can't remember the last time I was this genuinely concerned about the well-being of a horror movie character, and that's not just because dogs are the world's purest creatures with hearts of gold, but also because Indy does such a fantastic job of making you feel every single solitary emotion right alongside him. It is a truly impressive performance, not just for a dog, but for any actor regardless of species. And hell, let's add on top of that another great canine performance from Bandit, the golden retriever belonging to Todd's now deceased grandfather, who in the few times we get to see him also does an excellent job of making you feel the very real terror at what could happen to our new four-legged companion. Just a collection of the absolute goodest boys, I tell ya. The rest of the small cast does a good job providing backup to their canine co-star. Shane Jensen gets probably the second most screen time in the movie as Indy's tormented owner Todd. Jensen does a decent enough job portraying the chronically ill loner as he absconds to the haunted house in the woods. Jensen is sort of melancholy throughout the film's first half, but really turns up the heat in the latter portions as Todd further descends into madness as a direct result of the house's supernatural presence. Jensen strikes a good balance between your typical loving dog owner and a man desperately trying to cling on to some sense of normal life amid a deteriorating physical state. His performance meshes well with Indy's as the favorite human that our canine protagonist is working so hard to save. Ariel Friedman plays Todd's sister Vera, who only physically appears on screen twice, but we hear from her several times via phone call conversation with Todd. Despite not being physically present, Friedman actually does a really good job portraying the role of a concerned sister, with her voice acting being a real highlight of the film's slower moments. Listening to her attempt to reason with and sometimes argue with her brother through the ears of Indy paints a picture of a genuinely good person who cares about the people in their family. The other characters in this film are so minor that it doesn't really feel fair to judge the performances of the actors who are portraying them, but they actually do a pretty good job. Nobody stands out for any particular good or bad reason besides the people who are supposed to. The cinematography of this film is where it really stands apart. The shots following alongside Indy are some of the more creative and inventive shots I've seen in a horror movie in a long time. They really get you on Indy's level, which can make the viewer feel just as small and hopeless at times as the film's main star. The film also relies on cinematography to help ratchet up tension. Dimly lit rooms combined with some really creative angles help create an environment where you are constantly searching in the shadows for whatever could be lurking behind our new four-legged friend, which in turn sets up the audience perfectly for the film's well-timed jump scares. There are not a lot of special effects in this film due to its basically non-existent budget, but the few effects we do see on screen are very well done and don't break your sense of immersion in the film's supernatural events. This film uses the visual storytelling capabilities of cinematography to their absolute fullest, creating some truly beautiful and haunting scenes that help to try and elevate it past just being a novelty. This is a genuinely well shot, edited, and filtered movie that I would feel completely comfortable putting up against a lot of bigger budget horror films of today. Good Boy is not the groundbreaking horror experience some of you may be expecting. Its script is rather bland and simple in comparison to its incredibly creative premise, which can feel like a bit of a drag at times. That being said, the performance of its biggest star, alongside some very creative filmmaking tactics, make this a really enjoyable movie to take in. Good Boy isn't so much a horror movie, as it is more accurately the story of a dog's unconditional and unrelenting love for its owner, and the lengths that love pushes him to save his favorite human. Don't get me wrong, Good Boy isn't perfect, but it has creativity and heart at its core, which is more than I can say for a lot of movies in Hollywood these days. Good Boy gets a tail wagging 3 out of 5 stars. If you enjoyed this review and want to see more like it, please like this video and subscribe to the Planet Comedy YouTube channel. To find all the episodes of Real Review we have for you so far, everyone have a wonderful rest of your day, night, and week. Be kind to each other, believe in yourself, and I'll see you soon.